public will be asked to leave the meeting during the executive session. After the executive session, the board will vote on agenda items discussed in the executive session. I'll take roll now. Obviously, I am present. Skippy, is Skippy here? I don't think Skippy's.
I am also present. Can you hear me?
Yes, can hear you. Thank you. Good to see you.
All right.
Dr. Sisely.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, present.
Thank you. And then I just want to note that I'm going to skip that part. So I'm going to go to the next part. If you ask, as we get started, I'd like to ask everyone to turn their cell phones to silent. If you have to leave the meeting at any point, please let us know so we can reflect that in the minutes. The same goes for if you return, and please do not use the chat function if it is enabled for you on Zoom. And with that, I will turn it over to the program director, Director Bratton.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bratton, Natural Medicine Program Director. Today we have, we have Kathy Duran running the webinar for us. So thank you very much, Kathy. She's filling in for Linda. She's program manager in the director model unit. We also have Jana Contreras, who is taking care of our meets for us today. And we have Sam Rami, your senior advisor here. I did want to, we also have Jessica Fisher, our very new policy analyst who will be helping write our rules. So welcome to Jessica. I do want to mention, Chair, that we actually is here as part of the subcommittee today. So I want to reflect that in the meeting records. Do we have, yep, I see Allison is here for, are you representing DOR today, Allison? Okay, thanks, Allison. And I'd like to invite the Attorney General to introduce himself.
Good afternoon, Brian Urankar with the Colorado Attorney General's Office.
Thank you, my teacher.
Apologize, Lundy. I was confused about what your status was on the subcommittee, and the note changed. So I apologize for not your attendance or calling your name during roll. But we are extremely happy to have you here with us today. So I appreciate your presence. All right. So what I'd like to do now is review the meeting minutes from the last meeting, which was held on December 20th, 2023 at 1 p.m. You'll see those minutes scrolling in front of you now. As those meeting minutes scroll, I'll ask you can sign the minutes to Director Bratton.
I move to approve and delegate.
I'll second. Lundy.
Thank you, Dr. Sisely. In a second. Thank you, Lundy. Any discussion, any corrections to the meeting minutes as they're scrolling past? Hearing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Any abstain? The motion passes. I'll now pass it back to Director Bratton.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a few updates. One, this Friday, we're going to be approving the entire bulk of consolidated recommendations. So we really need to be sure that a quorum is present for that meeting. We'll also be making an amendment to the bylaws, which impact the frequency of the subcommittees. Many of you have said that it has been really difficult to have as many meetings that you've had over. By the end of the week, it'll be about 76 meetings since the start at allotted 4 hours a time, which is a large volume of dedication and commitment of time and effort from everyone to be present. So we've heard that that is just too many. So we're going to amend the bylaws and do make some changes and restructure the way that we have meetings. We'll have more about that coming up. But your presence is really appreciated at that meeting. Next, I just want to say that I'm very impressed and thank you for all that hard work that you've had for the past almost year now since you started with applications and improvements. It's really, it's just really a wonderful thing to see the amount of work. We have so many recommendations, and I really feel like you all are in a really good place to deliver the first round of the draft recommendations to the DOR and to DORA for us to start to promulgate rules and start the work that we need to implement. So I want to just say thank you. I want to pass it, if I can, please, Chair, to Sam to see if he has anything to add to what I've said.
Always happy to hear from Mr. Brown.
Dr. Connor, Vice Chair and Chair of the Subcommittee. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate what Lori just mentioned. You know, we have had over 70 meetings since April, and it's over a third of the agency's recommendations, a third of the Division of Professions and Occupations board meetings. And for folks that aren't familiar with other boards, they typically meet bi-monthly, quarterly, or biannually on their subjects. And I think you all should be extremely proud of the work that you have provided the agency so far, and the work doesn't end here, as well as the continued recommendations and meetings. Our plan right now is to have initial recommendations finalized at the Friday meeting, knowing that this will allow for the agencies to make sure we're hitting our rulemaking timelines, and we'll have official dates and meeting schedules publicly noticed in the next few weeks. But the work doesn't end here. The questions don't end here, and your feedback doesn't end here as well. We have a lot more to work on, other natural medicines. The plan is to essentially get these recommendations submitted at the February meeting for the full board, have our preliminary draft rules shown to you all, provide comment, feedback, as well as for stakeholder meetings on these specific subjects that the subcommittees have worked on. We want to get feedback, revisions, comments, whether it's written or voiced publicly at those meetings prior to rulemaking, so we have time. And ideally, once we have our initial recommendations in, we give you back some of your time and allow us to restructure the subcommittee schedule and policy topics for the rest of 2024. And for our non-voting participants, we want to make sure that you are a part of this process as well. And we're going to be asking for you all to join us at our stakeholder meetings and on the future policy discussions from the restructured subcommittees. And we'll be looking to you and your colleagues for additional feedback and comments on the drafted rules in this first process, knowing that there's going to be recommendations in 2025, maybe later this year, and there's going to be continued work on this entire process. And we wouldn't have been, we couldn't have been where we are here today in products or any of the other subcommittees without the non-voting participants and other stakeholders and participants and the people watching and providing feedback and comment in this process. And I think for Dora, we really appreciate your service to the state in this process, and hope that you continue to work with us as we go into our next phase. So thank you.
Thanks, Sam. And now I'll pass to Brian for an update from the AG.
Yeah, not much of an update other than, just again, if there's any specific legal questions that you would like some more in-depth analysis, it's helpful for me to get that flagged ahead of time or explicitly flagged so I can bring it to you in the next meeting. But other than that, that's about all I have, Dr. Connor.
Thank you. So in a moment, I'm going to ask the non-voting subcommittee participants to introduce themselves. As a reminder, if you can change your name in Zoom to reflect your pronouns, please do so. If not, make sure that when you introduce yourself, you offer your pronouns and your affiliation. But before I start calling names, I just want to echo the thanks that have been echoed from that have been offered from staff. The non-voting participants have come to most or many or all of the meetings and have offered invaluable support, help, suggestions, insight, and knowledge. And I just want to take a moment before I have you all introduce yourselves to thank you for the hard work that you've done. We would not be here without the help that you provided us. So that's my personal thanks. And with that, I will start the introductions by asking for Scott Hansen to introduce himself. Scott's not here, so we'll go to Dr. Duncan Mackey.
Sorry, I was changing my pronouns. Duncan Mackey, Director of Research Director at Mary's Med Farm. No conflicts of interest or anything to declare.
Thanks, Duncan. Nathan Wilkes.
Hi, Nathan Wilkes, Health Data and Security Expert.
Thank you. Dr. Ken Kassenbrock.
Hello, Ken Kassenbrock, Emeritus Professor of Biology at Colorado State University, and I also have no conflicts.
Thanks, Hamilton Pevick.
Hi, I'm Hamilton Pevick. I am the president of the Western Colorado Mycological Association. It still says there, the Society. I'd like to apologize for leaving the meeting early last month without mentioning it, and I will have to leave again early today because my daughter gets home at 3:15.
Thanks, Hamilton. Can you tell us one more time? Just you want to say Western Colorado Mycological Association and not Society? Is that right?
Correct. It's association. Yeah.
Yeah, so if we could have that reflected, I'd appreciate it. Dr. Peter Hendricks.
Hi, Peter Hendricks. I'm Professor of Psychiatry at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Are we discussing conflicts? Because that could be long. Did you want me to mention that?
No, you'll be okay. I do think that you and I should, I'll mention a conflict after you finish introducing yourself.
Okay.
So Dr. Hendricks is an editor of a journal, and the group that I work with has submitted an article to that journal. And so I would call it an apparent conflict of interest. I don't think it's a real conflict of interest, but I think it's important to note that I have co-authored an article that is being considered for publication in a journal that Dr. Hendricks is the editor for.
I hadn't noticed that yet.
Good.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing. But I figured it'd be good to go on the record with it. Thanks. Daniel Story. Is Daniel here? All right. Skylar Sefik.
Hi, I'm Skylar Sefik, EM. I am co-founder and mycologist at MycoSef.
Thanks. Dr. David Saha.
David Saha, EM, I'm Managing Director at Ad Science Lab.
Thank you. Nigam Aurora.
That's it. Hey, I'm Nigam Aurora. I'm co-founder at Barcode Aurora and lead chemistry. We are a boutique consultancy working in safety and efficacy in cannabis and psychedelics.
I apologize, Nigam. I should have addressed you as Dr. Nigam Aurora. And Dr. John Marco. Is John here?
I'm not sure if he's on.
I don't see him. Okay, Colton Brook.
Yeah, hi, Colin Brook. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the laboratory manager at Altitude Consulting.
Thanks. Heather Krug.
Hi, I'm Heather Krug Sheher, and I'm the regulatory programs bridge chief at the State Adult Laboratory at CDPHE.
Ian Seep.
Good afternoon. My name is Ian Seeb. I am the governor's special advisor on cannabis and natural medicine.
Allison Robinette.
Good afternoon, Board. Alison Robinette. I serve as the Director of Policy and Regulatory Affairs for the Department of Revenue's Natural Medicine Division.
Kyle Lambert.
Hey, Kyle Lambert, I'm Deputy Senior Director with Department of Revenue's Natural Medicine Division. I do see Darius Grant on the list. He won't be joining us. He has moved to a new agency.
He's moved to a new agency. Well, Miss Davis. Thanks, Kyle.
We miss him more.
I bet. Dr. Adi Ray Wilson Pope.
Hi, this is Adi Ray. I am a translational neuroscientist at Legacy Research Institute in Portland, Oregon. I'm also the co-founder and program director of OPEN, the Oregon Psilocybin Evaluation Nexus.
Thanks, I apologize. 80, right? Dr. Dan Houston. And Caleb King.
Caleb King, he, him, co-founder of Triptomics in Longmont, Colorado.
I think that's everybody. There's, I know that Lori introduced Jessica Fisher, but Jessica, did you also want to introduce yourself? Maybe not. Make sure we got a chance to say hi. All right. We'll move on. We'll come back to that. So our first agenda item is to review the updates to the consolidated recommendations. If we get those on screen, the main updates you'll see from the consolidated recommendations is as per the request at the last meeting. I have offered rationale for each of the recommendations that we are making. And so you'll see the recommendations on the consolidated recommendations form. I think we're going to start on I have it as a PDF and slide, so maybe a different document, but we should go to the products, research and data section and start with the draft recommendations for testing. And so underneath each, you'll see reasoning. We can go through these in some detail. The goal for this today is to review the recommendations so that at the end of the meeting, we can hopefully have a motion to approve the consolidated recommendations from this subcommittee to be sent on to the full board for consideration for a recommendation to regulatory agencies. I just want to say, again, thanks to everybody. I think that we've covered most or all of the questions that were initially posed to us in some detail and have at least some recommendations for each one of those. So here we're going to look at the first 10 recommendations, which are related to testing. Again, the main difference you're going to see here from the last meeting is I've added rationale and reasoning for each one of those recommendations. And if you want to comment on the reasoning and rationale, have that changed. Or if you want to change any of the recommendations, now would be a time to bring those up. So first is I'm not going to go through these in detail unless that's what people want me to do. I think we've gone through these in a lot of detail already. The last meeting and the meeting prior to that, we spent a lot of time on point number 4, and I just want to direct your attention to that to make sure everyone's in agreement that reflects the conversations that we had in the last couple of meetings. I don't think 1, 2, or 3 have changed substantially in the last couple of meetings, although I did add the ISO numbers for proficiency testing to point 2. So it has comment or question, you can just raise your hand and I'll call on you. Again, if we can scroll down now to see 7, 8, 9, and 10. 9 and 10 don't have rationale or reasoning. We could add that if we needed to, but I don't know if that needs reasoning for 9 and 10 on this one. Heather?
Thanks, Dr. Connor. I just wanted to note in number 2, I think it rates maybe a little confusing. It's that the laboratories approved by the regulatory agency don't need to meet 17043. 17043 is a standard for accreditation of proficiency testing providers. So I think the intention is that the lab should participate in proficiency testing provided by 17043 accredited proficiency testing providers, not that the lab herself will need to meet that standard.
All right, so can you offer some language that might make it more clear, just so I'm not wording it incorrectly again?
Sure. So I think where it says species shall meet ISO 17043, I think I would just change that to something like well, actually, at the beginning, we say all laboratories approved shall participate in the group program. Sorry, I didn't have this prepared at the time, so now I'm going to read it and find the best way to insert this.
Yeah, come back if you want to take a second.
Yeah, give me a second.
Yeah, that's fine. Lundy?
Just real quick, I keep hearing feedback when people are speaking, and I think it may either be from your microphone staying on or Nathan is unmuted. But if we could just mute when other people are speaking, I think it would help us hear what people are saying a bit better.
Yeah, Nathan, are you able to mute your mic?
I have mute on the local side, so I keep that always on. So even though you see my mic on, it's
All right. So Lundy, when you think you might be for my mic, but I'll try to mute when I'm not.
Maybe. Yeah, that would be great. Thank you so much.
Heather, do you need more time? Do you feel like you're ready to go?
I think I got it. So I would say, where it says shall, I would say shall participate in proficiency testing provided by ISO 17043 accredited proficiency testing providers. And then you can leave the rest of the language, I think.
So now I forgot to unmute. Sam, did you get with that? Did you get that?
Yeah, Heather, could you repeat that one more time? I just want to make sure I have that correct. And species shall participate in proficiency testing by
Proficiency testing provided by ISO 17043 accredited proficiency testing providers.
Then Sam, everything or similar stays the same. So you're just replacing shall meet ISO proficiency test standards to the or. Does that make sense?
All right, one more time.
Shall participate in proficiency testing provided by ISO 17043 accredited proficiency testing providers. And then leave the or in the rest of the sentence.
Okay, I got it.
And given that we're going to make a motion on these to move them on later, I'd love to see if we can get that put into the consolidated recommendations before we have that motion, if possible, Director Bright.
Yes.
Great. Colton?
I just had a question about 3. We're all clear on 2. Really going into the round robin testing part, would it be that, so right now it says that the regulatory agency shall develop a proficiency test program for all labs that wish to be approved for testing of natural medicines. Would it be a requirement that you become ISO 17025 accredited and then also pass the ISO accredited proficiency testing prior to doing that? As in, would you have to complete steps 1 and 2 prior to being a part of any round robin testing?
I don't think that those steps are implied in the way that we've written them right now, that they need to be sequential in that manner. I think we left that open to the regulatory agency to decide.
Okay, just quickly on that note then, I sent Sam some data that a few labs were a part of. There was an organization, Psychedelic Standards Organization, Frank Orwich and Rocco Iannopolo actually did their own inter-laboratory study due to the discussions from the last meeting. And so the data was a little disappointing, as in the results were really far apart for the most part. Although my knowledge is that the 2 labs that have completed the ISO accredited proficiency testing, being our lab Altitude and Triptomics, were actually fairly close. The highest variance was just over 10%. So I would recommend that if labs are going to be participating in any round robin studies, I would highly recommend that they complete steps 1 and 2 prior to adding their data into something that people may have to be part of.
So, Cole, are you suggesting that we add language to point 3 that says that points 1 and 2 should be met before they're allowed to participate in point 3?
That would be my recommendation, yes.
Are there anyone opposed to adding that language? Heather?
Not necessarily opposed. I just want to put something out there for everyone to consider. In the previous discussion about proficiency testing, specifically for potency, because this is still a controlled substance, those third-party ISO accredited PT providers may not be able to provide PT samples in the psilocybin matrix, right? They may have to spike psilocybin into some other type of mushroom, and that may cause may introduce essentially new interferences and difficulties in testing, so that you're not designing the exact same test on a different sample type because they don't perform the same way. So, this round robin concept I think was considered because the intent here is that you would use the actual, saved mushrooms that are on the available to consumers, not some other surrogate. So again, psilocybin containing mushrooms. So if we may want to consider doing this in first, or even instead of using those third-party accredited proficiency testing providers, if the third-party proficiency testing provider can't provide a PT that is really useful in evaluating the laboratory's performance. I hope that makes sense.
I think it makes sense. But wouldn't the or statement in point 2 and in point 1 cover that? The idea that we're saying or similar or newly developed standards that are particularly relevant to the testing of natural medicines, would that provide some coverage for that?
I guess if that's the intent of that or, then that would help. When I read the or and related to newly developed standards, I read that as some new standard in place of 17043.
Yeah, I don't know that we were being that specific, but instead saying if we develop those standards within the state of Colorado, for instance, then we could use those because they're more relevant to natural medicines than would be to other mushroom products. Dr. Sisely?
Yeah, no, I wanted to agree with Heather about, I'm not sure I understood that the or meant that, and I'd like to see it clarified a little bit more if possible. I don't know if we can still do an amendment, but since Caleb's on the phone, I remember listening to his presentation last time, and he had some pretty specific language, and if there's any way to mimic that.
Sure, we had a discussion. I was looking to see if making sure that Caleb's. I'm looking at all the names. Yeah, Caleb, are you still here with us?
Yes, I am.
Do you know the language that you used? That?
Yes, I believe I can share that with everyone. I would have to dig through it here and look that up. Just a second, though.
Just put your hand up when you're ready, and I'll come back to you.
Please remind me why Psilocybe cubensis is the only one allowed to be cultivated.
So that was a discussion that we had probably in the first meeting of this subcommittee, and it was to make sure that we had some uniformity in the market and to indicate that research suggests that there is no harms associated with that species of mushroom. And anyone who wants to add more to that recollection can. Sam?
Yeah, I think it was to making it as simple as possible for confirmation testing as well in the first phase, but acknowledging that the board wants to annually consider other species of psilocybin mushrooms to the regulatory program. But for the first phase, it would be cubensis, and then would annually review additional mushrooms for the program.
Yes, I think it's simplicity and streamlined, and to stay away from mushrooms that might be associated with harms, especially the wood-loving mushrooms. But Hampton, go ahead.
I was just going to say, does that language need to be added to this under the reasoning that it's just for the first phase?
We could add it. I think it's known that the process will be iterative, but if you would prefer that there, we could talk about adding it. But every year we'll go through a rulemaking process where we'll have the option to expand. Okay, so
sorry, Brad, didn't mean to interrupt you. I should have raised my hand. I was just going to say, I think it's also included in a later section where the division should only permit it's under NGAP in cultivation best practices, only permit the cultivation of psilocybin containing mushrooms in the species Psilocybin cubensis, no other species. shall be permitted. The division should permit the cultivation of all strains of cubensis. And then in the reasoning, we are proposing this as research indicates that psilocybin cubensis is safe for humans consumption and has few known risks. The board will annually review other species of psilocybin-fruiting fungi to be considered for the natural medicine regulated access program each year. Additionally, we are taking into consideration the costs associated with the confirmation testing.
Sam, hold on, it's still up, so either way, you were going to have to interrupt me. So, but thanks for reading that. I appreciate it. Is my mic still feedback when I mute? Does that help?
I think it helps.
Okay. Okay, so where we're at right now, still under the testing recommendations, is whether we want to, how do we clarify the OR language after points 1 and 2 to make sure it's clear that it doesn't have to be ISO standards, but it could be standards that are developed specifically for the testing of natural medicines, and then whether we want to make 3 contingent on first completing 1 and 2. And Kayla, I wonder if you're ready yet. If not, it's okay.
Yes. So I believe the original language was that the round robin testing would occur before or as kind of a phase 1 approach to the laboratory proficiency or assessment of labs being capable, given the current proficiency testing environment not having representative matrices, as Heather mentioned. So the language saying that the round robin testing would occur first as a sign of laboratory competency.
Okay, so then it's not stipulated that we want 1 and 2 to happen before 3, but that 3 would potentially happen before 1 and 2. Am I getting that right? Go ahead, Colton. I'm sorry, go ahead, Keela. I'll come back to you, Colton. Go ahead, Keela.
Yeah, so number 3, aspects of number 3, are certainly included as part of 1 and 2, but I guess the part about proficiency testing, specifically point number 2, would be that the round robin assessment would occur before ISO 17034 proficiency testing programs would be implemented.
Thanks, Colton.
Yeah, I just again want to add that we just did an interlaboratory study, and as one example, some of the results, the highest variance was over 70%. I would say that the median was probably like 20 to 30% between labs. And so this is why I think that if we push the labs to have to get ISO certified and then also pass the accredited proficiency testing, I think that's going to lead to less variance, not having a 70% difference in the round robin aspect, which is going to be, I don't know if that data is going to be very useful when trying to decide, who's competent or not.
So I wanted to add, there are some exceptions depending upon the specifics of the situation, but in general, ISO 17025 accreditation requires participation in accredited proficiency testing if it is available. So typically, a laboratory will have to successfully participate in that 17043 proficiency testing in order to actually obtain ISO accreditation under 17025. And then, so again, just my personal thought and perhaps recommendation to the board would be not to require one of these in any sequential order, but to leave the regulatory discretion to the agencies so that we can, again, when we are ready to actually implement something, determine what is available and what is best. I can speak from experience with the cannabis side of things that for us to actually develop that round robin, while it's certainly doable, it may take us quite a lot of time because there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just that we have to get some mushrooms and hand them out to the labs. We have to figure out how to do the statistical analyses. We have to be able to we actually have to have an analytical method to determine the homogeneity to ensure that we're giving all labs the same sample so that we can actually compare their results. So we have to have a method by which we can actually test these products. We have to do statistics. We have to figure out how we actually obtain the mushrooms. And we also have to figure out a route for how we distribute them because, we cannot distribute ourselves controlled substances. So I would just suggest that perhaps there isn't a defined timeline in these recommendations.
So it would suggest that we can leave them as written, except for maybe adding some language to clarify the or similar, but not necessarily require specific order. Is that what you're suggesting, Heather?
That would be my suggestion.
Great. Thanks, Dr. Sisely.
It's a question for Heather that, so you're saying that proficiency testing is actually easier for you to execute than round robin because you're not dealing with any decriminalized material, or federally illegal material. Is that right?
It is easier for us to, again, rely on a third party because that is their business. This is what they do versus us having to create our own round robin process. I will say again, sometimes though, the problem with these types of tests is that the third parties are not actually they're not offering anything that is relevant to what's being required for testing, or again, they may have these matrix issues themselves. So in order to have the best analysis of laboratory performance, the round robin may offer advantages, but again, as we move forward, it's kind of helpful if we have the ability to evaluate all the options and go forward with the one that is best at that time, and then maybe change that as well over time if, say, a PT provider can offer something suitable.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Okay, yeah, I'm definitely in agreement then to just leave the language and give the health department the leeway to do that. At least we have notes here making these suggestions, because I really like the way the progression worked, although I understand what Colton was saying earlier. But I guess I don't understand from Colton's comments why we couldn't require ISO certification and round robin. Why would it have to be ISO certification and PT? But I understand the complexities here, so I'll support the language as it is.
So just to clarify, do we want to add language on the or similar so that it's not specific to, it's clear that it's not specific to ISO, but it could be developed, those tests could be developed by anybody, or do we feel like the language is okay the way it is?
Personally, I think it's vague enough that it gives CDPHE enough, flexibility to do what they need to do. So that's fine.
But I think that was a really fruitful discussion. Thanks, everybody. Any other comments, questions, concerns about the draft recommendations for testing? And Dr. Sisely, your hand's still up and up. That's a remnant, or if you've got other points that you want to make. Lundy?
Yeah, I as someone who's not trained in this area and is trying to comprehend as much as I can, I just want to understand that if we leave it as is, it still allows for like the quality control, because that's a massive variance. So I love eliminating the roadblocks, especially for CDPHE, but I just want to make sure that I understand as a subcommittee member what would be the potential gains or losses leaving it as is.
My understanding of the way of leaving it as is, and I'm happy to hear from other people, is that it allows CDPHE the most flexibility in designing the system. And that's what my goal would be, is to, since that is what they do and they know this area, that I want to give them the most flexibility to design the safest and most consistent system. But that's just my thought.
While upholding the same kind of quality control. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I also figured out that I can use my spacebar to mute and unmute, which is much more efficient than trying to click a button on my screen every 5 seconds. I might still forget though, so if I'm talking and you don't hear me, yell it.
Thank you for doing that, Dr. Connor.
Sure, and I'll try to, if we get a point where we take a break, I'll try to restart my computer, hopefully fix that problem. Points 9 and 10, Allison, you had asked us to provide reasoning for our recommendations. These recommendations were added, and I wondered if you want us to put reasoning for recommendations 9 and 10 under test.
Yes, thanks, Dr. Connor. I believe you were directing that to me. And I think I know what 9 and 10 are, but if we could scroll to make sure I'm not speaking out of turn on this. And your question was if you would like reasoning behind these. I think that will always be helpful for any of the recommendations, because it'll help provide us guidance when we're either in rulemaking or other conversations. So would appreciate reasoning if you all have that sort of already articulated in your minds.
I don't know that we have this articulated, because I don't think that the rest of the board or the non-voting participants have seen these 2 recommendations. So let's just have a second to review the 2 recommendations, and if anyone wants to suggest language for reasoning, if not, I can do. Any recommendations for a reasoning language for point 9? Go ahead, Brian.
See, you said the spacebar thing, and I knew about it, and then I started hitting spacebar after a meeting, and it was throwing me off. So the reason for number 9 is if you look at section 4453.014, it specifically says that someone can't hold a license both under the Natural Medicine Code as well as Article 10 of Title 44, which is marijuana. So that includes testing facilities for both NatMed and marijuana. I don't think that was the General Assembly's intent, was to, because there's no benefit to the public to prevent a testing facility from being able to test both marijuana and psilocybin.
So I might say the reasoning is to allow flexibility for testing facilities to be able to test for multiple substances.
Yeah, to permit third-party facilities to be able to test multiple substances and to increase profitability for licensees or something like that. I think that was the big concern that Dr. Sisely raised, was that if you can't hold a license for both, it's going to be a little bit prohibitive to get into the natural medicine space.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so if we can get that language written, Sam, did you get?
Sorry, Brian, could you repeat that?
Let me make it not word salad, and then I'll shoot it to you.
I would say reasoning, this will allow for testing facilities to hold multiple licenses to ease the burden of third-party testing. All
right. Thank you.
Brian, your hand's still up, so I'm going to ask you for suggested language for point 10, and I apologize that you need it at the same time.
I'm going to have to think about that one. I remember adding that recommendation because we talked about it, but I don't remember the specific reasoning why the subcommittee wanted to do that.
Well, we didn't want to require in-house testing because it would increase the cost of licenses. We didn't want to prohibit it because individuals might be interested in doing their own testing to figure out their own products or their own issues. I don't know, maybe I looked at Colton and thought Colton was part of this conversation, but I might be misremembering. Colton, do you remember this conversation?
No, I do not, unfortunately.
That's great. No, it's all right. I could be completely wrong. I don't know why you were part of that conversation, but Dr. Sisely.
Yeah, I remember this because, of course, a lot of the manufacturers do have an HPLC in-house, and they do want to run their own potency testing, do their just own internal research. So I don't know how to word that, but yeah, I think it's crucial that we certainly don't prohibit them from doing their own testing. It's not going to end up on the label later, but they should be authorized to do that as long as they're properly tracking any materials that are getting diverted into testing and explaining why, how it's being wasted.
So let's try to accept this for reasoning. This recommendation was developed to allow for innovation within cultivators, but also to indicate that third-party testing should be the standard for natural medicine products.
It's good with me.
Sam, did you get that?
One more time. Thank you.
This recommendation was developed to allow cultivators innovation and product development while also requiring that third-party testing be conducted for labeling processes. I didn't say it the same way, but it's something like that.
Just the instead, you had a point of being the instead is throwing me off a little bit. I think, I don't know, maybe a however would be, is that what's intended there? I'm trying to get that show. I think I understand the intention is allow cultivators to do testing if they want to do testing, and if they want to invest in the equipment, R&D, quality assurance, whatever it is, then you can do it. However, that does not replace third-party testing requirements.
Yeah, either
Instead.
Yeah, I think you can either strike the instead or change it to however. I think either one is fine with me. I don't think a word is necessary. So I think you could just start with all testing required by the division should be conducted by licensed third parties. But if you really wanted a joining phrase, I think it's however and not instead. Thanks, Kyle.
Yeah, I got that.
All right, so I think that concludes discussion on recommendations for testing, and I'd like to move to the recommendations for MGAP and cultivation best practices. And there are 7 of them here. We'll need to come up with reasoning for number 7 that was added, but the others have all been, or 6 and 7 will need reasoning, but 1 through 5 we've had a lot of discussion on, and I don't think anything has changed except probably paying attention to point 4. The reason I called your attention to point 4 is that we'd had some discussion about this, and I wanted to make sure that what I wrote accurately reflected that discussion. Dr. Kassenbach.
Oh, hi. I haven't had time to look at all these yet, but point 1 has some language that needs to be cleaned up. If we can scroll back to that. So the division should permit cultivation of psilocybin-containing mushrooms of the species Psilocybin cubensis. That should read Psilocybe cubensis. Okay, that's the correct way of referring to the mushroom itself, Psilocybe cubensis, not Psilocybin cubensis. And then at the end of that same sentence, at the end of that same, so be great, thank you. Then the Psilocybe is always capitalized. Not the cubensis, but the Psilocybe, the genus Psilocybe, genus names are always capitalized. And then down in reasoning, we are, again, the same thing. Psilocybin cubensis should be Psilocybe cubensis, and it should be capitalized for the Psilocybe part. Okay, great. So that language looks better.
Thanks, Ken. Lundy?
Yeah, so I'm kind of reverberating something Dr. Sisely said in early months of being careful of not over-regulating, and I'm also thinking about the equity lens of curiosity around requiring a completely separate license for outdoor cultivation. Again, it's not lost on me how hard it is to outdoor cultivate in Colorado, but I'm wondering, like, my assumption maybe people would likely want to do indoor cultivation primarily. So why are we requiring 2 separate licenses that could be 2 separate full fees as opposed to maybe an additional aspect to the license of cultivation so that it could potentially be more cost permissible? Or is there some reasoning that I'm not aware of? I'm just generally wanting to have an eye on that we're not unnecessarily or overly regulating, and also keeping equity in mind. So would love some understanding there.
Yeah, I appreciate the point. We went back and forth on this. The original recommendation was to not permit outdoor cultivation, but then after a presentation and thinking about the very points that you just made, Lundy, we landed on this idea of a separate license, primarily for a phrase that I never thought I'd have to utter again, but for the reasons of, like, associated with things like fecal drift and other things that are going to happen that need to be addressed when you're trying to cultivate outdoors that don't need to be addressed when you're cultivating indoors or in a more controlled space. And so we landed on this as the best compromise in between not permitting outdoor cultivation and then not regulating outdoor cultivation, which was to have this, if you're going to take the chance of doing this, then you're going to have to bear some of the cost for doing it.
Yeah, then I think in my mind, I wonder about maybe just having a hybrid license where there could also be one license that takes care of both, rather than the same business having to purchase 2 separate full licenses, right? Because I imagine that there are some distinctions, but there's also a lot of overlaps. So I just, I want to get to what you're talking about while also considering the actual day-to-day ramifications for companies that may consider a scenario of this kind.
Thanks, Lundy. Skippy?
Yeah, I just wanted to reflect back what Lundy said, because I think this language actually captures the conversation well and splits the difference. I think Lundy's bringing up a good point where I don't hear her suggesting that any of the additional requirements of safety are shifted, simply that those happen under the existing license. So we still prescribe those additional things as necessary. There's just not a requirement to purchase a second license, which I think is fine.
So it sounds like the problematic phrase might be an additional, rather than just saying outdoor cultivation should require a license type that reflects the inherent difficulties. Would that be sufficient? I'm seeing not. So we can get the change then, unless someone objects, if we can get a change to point 4. So it says outdoor cultivation should require a license type that reflects the inherent difficulties of outdoor cultivation. That Lundy, your hand is still up. I just wonder if that's a remnant or if you wanted to comment.
Just a reminder, Skippy, my pronouns are they, them.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I want to echo what is being said here and just call out, maybe can refer to defer to DOR in terms of the challenges or just the inherent costs associated with creating additional license types. That is something that we struggle with now related to cannabis, and recognize that with each additional license type, as opposed to creating something that would be perhaps all-encompassing, as Lundy is referring to, may incur additional costs and additional fiscal notes as a result of just creating them, as opposed to perhaps having different criteria for a license type that suggests that if the licensed cultivation is going to be outside, there's this criteria. If it's inside, there's this criteria, and leave the criteria up to the division as to how they would license a cultivation facility versus indoor or outdoor. And without obligating Allison, just want to offer her the opportunity to address that.
Dane. Allison, you've been called on.
Yeah, thanks, Ian, for flagging that. I don't have anything different or additional to add. I'll just note, as Ian suggested, we have found ways to navigate this in the cannabis space by looking at what requirements are most necessary, for example, for an outdoor cultivation versus an indoor cultivation. And we've navigated that through the rulemaking process in a way that we can be flexible as new considerations come up through the life of the regulations.
So then, Allison and or Ian, are you recommending changes to this language or additions to this language, or do you think it is okay the way it's written?
I think that without explicitly calling out an additional license would be the preference, and I think as removed or as edited here, it is likely acceptable. That is my concern. It is the additional license type and the costs associated with that, as Lundy was suggesting.
But you think this is okay by just saying a license type? Allison, do you agree?
Yes, I think that by eliminating an additional, this will give us enough flexibility and direction to know what your intent is, as demonstrated by the reasoning under the point, that we can, if anything different comes out of the rulemaking process, we'll be consulting with you all throughout that anyway. So you'll be up to date on if we're having to shift our approach.
Thanks. Lundy?
Yeah, I needed to jump off on the hour, so if I could go ahead and do my attestation, I'd really appreciate it. Pardon my jumping in.
Now
With you.
Now I spacebar is scrolling my screen, so it's. But do you attest and affirm that all conflicts of interest have been disclosed and the confidentiality of all board matters has been maintained since the previous board meeting?
I attest. Thanks, Dr. Connor.
Pleasure having you. Thanks. Nick.
I was just gonna support what Ian was saying as someone who's been an applicant for multiple license types in the cannabis space. I'm just in full support of streamlining in the way that you was that thought.
Great, thanks. Pat.
Yeah, just looking at it, I mean, maybe the reference to license type in general is what's tripping up. If I understand the intention, it's about considering the regulatory requirements for to mitigate, potential concerns like contamination or other things. So maybe it's that regulations should consider inherent difficulties of outdoor cultivation and require additional testing, but I'm not so sure the license type is critical there or is getting to the intended place.
Yeah, I would prefer that we leave it as is, even as Sam is highlighting it, because I think that it provides the flexibility that the division can figure out how they want to implement it without changing the language. I don't know that we want to wordsmith directly. If everyone's okay with that, I'd like to leave it as is and go from there. Nick, if your hand is still up, and if that's an artifact, or if you've got another point you want to make.
Artifact.
Skippy.
Yes, so I'm comfortable with language as is. I have a suggestion for an addition to the reasoning. I heard someone say, I think they'll understand our intention, and we might be able to clean that up. So I'm just going to say this out loud quickly to see if you guys agree, guys, girls, and others. Sorry, I'm having a pronoun day, I guess. And then I can go back slower for Sam but it would add to the beginning of the sentence and then keep what's already there. So it would read, reasoning, we seek to preserve historic, organic, indigenous, and sacred ways of cultivating mushrooms while acknowledging concerns, and then it would read as it does so that we get both sides of why we're trying to balance this. If you guys think that's worthwhile, I can repeat it more slowly.
I'm not opposed to adding that to the reasoning. Let's give a second for anybody else to show opposition to that. If not, we'll have you add it. Any opposition, Ken?
Yeah, sorry, there's not traditional cultivation of mushrooms. Mushrooms have always been wild collected until the last 2 decades or so. Maybe 4 decades, but yeah. So there's not a long historic use of outdoor cultivation of mushrooms.
Thanks, Ken. Stu, do you want to read back what you suggested?
Yeah, sure. So we seek to preserve historic, organic, indigenous, and sacred ways of cultivating while acknowledging
Can we just
into concerns as it is.
These ways of cultivating to just read it one more time. I had a word that might address both concerns.
Sure. Preserve historic, organic, indigenous, and sacred ways of cultivating while acknowledging concerns, ... So
what if we just said sacred practices and didn't use the word cultivating in there? Would you be okay with that, Skippy?
Sure.
Yep. Lundy?
Yeah, I think an additional reason is just the cost of doing business, that we're thoughtful to that. I think that would be worthwhile in the reasoning.
Okay. So I think, Sam, we're going to update the reasoning for point 4 to reflect the language that Skippy offered and to reflect the language that Lundy offered while keeping in concerns about differences. So the preamble will be, Skippy, I'm going to have you read it one more time. Sorry. The preamble from Skippy to start. You're muted, Skippy.
Does that make it more challenging? We seek to preserve historic. I'll wait for the cursor to follow up and then I'll.
Sammy there.
Yeah.
All right. So Skippy's going to read some language. You're going to type it in, yeah?
Yeah, and then I'll move it over to the document.
Typing out.
Okay. Got it. So we seek to preserve historic, organic, indigenous, and sacred practices while acknowledging concerns, and then it would read from the word concerns in the existing reasoning. And I believe that talked about costs, but I want to make sure Lundy's suggestion is reflected. So maybe at the very end, cost of cultivation and licensure. That's a suggestion, that last bit, to capture Lundy's thoughts.
I think Lundy might have had to leave, so we'll have to hope that that reflects their thought.
Okay.
Check. Yeah, thanks, Ken, for that fruitful. Say them when you're ready. Let me know what you move on.
Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, we seek to preserve historic, organic, indigenous, and sacred practices while acknowledging concerns about differences in cultivation when attempting outdoor cultivation, how those differences may alter the cost of cultivation.
And licensure.
And licensure. And licensure. Perfect.
Well, Sam's moving that over to the consolidated draft recommendations. Let's look at 6 and 7 to develop reasoning, and then any other points that anyone might have about the 1 through 7 recommendations under testing. So first, let's look at point 6 and see if we can develop reason.
Yeah.
Brian, I can ask for your help here too. So this would have been one of the very first recommendations that we made that got added late after I added my reasoning because it dropped off. And my memory of the discussion was that we were trying to make sure that we were delineating what could be added and what should not be allowed to be added in the production phase, in the cultivation phase, and the production phase. But I could be wrong about that.
So I haven't seen this. I know Oregon did this, and I argued against it. Manure is used to cultivate button mushrooms. We use it for mushrooms all the time. It's not inherently unsafe if it's dealt with in a reasonable manner.
Thanks, Ken. I'm going to direct this to 6. We'll come back to 7, but your point for 7 is well made, and we'll come back to that. Do you have any comment on reasons for point 6 on additives versus food safety? That's okay. You're right. So just trying to provide reasoning language for point 6, and then we'll do it point 7. Hamilton.
Yeah, I'm curious about the reasoning around why additives that affect potency should be excluded or impermissible in this language.
I think that gets back to the idea that we don't want people altering the law stipulates that natural medicines should not be adulterated in any way. Brian, am I getting that right? Or I get too deep into
the statute says that it can't be synthetic. I don't know about the unadulterated. Let me go take a look.
This is, and maybe Brian can have a look for us, but there was something in the language early on about this idea that we don't want people trying to unnecessarily increase the potency of natural medicines through synthetic processes.
Okay, but the different substrate ingredients change potency naturally because of the nutrients involved in those substrate recipes. So, the difference between using manure, cocoa coir, grain, whatever, a combination of those things will affect potency. And people will change their recipes to get more potent mushrooms, especially if, they're incentivized to through the language of the law. Then there are other substances like tryptophan that will encourage more psilocybin production. So I'm curious if these things have been talked about or if I'm late to the game here.
So I actually think that point 6 would be better moved to products rather than cultivation, because I don't think we meant to inhibit the substrates that people would use when we put this up. It was more about the idea that once they were producing a product that would be distributed to participants, that they might add things to increase potency that may also increase the harm associated with the natural medicine. So I think your point is well made here, Hamilton, that and I wonder if you'd have the same opposition if it was under products rather than cultivation.
Okay, sorry. My opposition is in the language, I think. Not necessarily. I like the idea of including some words about not spraying a fruit body with something, but the fact that it's talking about substrates, or maybe the language needs to be specific about not adding to the fruit body versus adding to the substrate. And I don't know what that language would be, but
that's why I was saying moving to products, because I don't know that we. So Brian, did you have? I think you drafted this language. Did we talk about substrates before? Do you have concerns about substrate?
No, I pulled that out of, I think it was the September recommendations that we had. So I think that was pretty close to word for word.
But so again, it's this idea about additives to substrate. I don't think it limits the substrate in any way, Hamilton. It's just about if you're going to add things to substrate.
right. But in this case, it doesn't specifically say substrate. It just says additives during the cultivation of medicines.
Let's let me read it one more time before I say more about it. Make sure I got it right in my head.
So during the cultivation could be like any time that they're growing.
Right, but the second part of that, so that says the division should permit the use of other additives, such as inactive ingredients from the FDA's inactive ingredient database, or additives to substrate that encourage without changing, without changing the natural medicine's intoxicating effects or increasing harm. But I mean, I can see, but that says to permit. So we would permit additives to substrates that not prohibit them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but it still seems weird to me, frankly, because anything you add to the substrate is going to change the potency. Any recipe changes will affect potency overall. And the point of this language is to say, don't affect the potency, unless I'm reading it wrong.
No, I think it's not this. It's really about it's about increasing harm more than it is about the intoxicating effects. But we were thinking about when we originally wrote this was this idea of adding other intoxicating additives that would, like, so this would be like adding cannabis to, or adding fentanyl or something like that to increase intoxicating effects, not the natural occurring potency of the product, but something that would sort of, for lack of a better word, unnaturally increase the intoxicating effect.
Got it.
Let's get some more discussion. Hilton, we'll come back to it. Addie? No. Okay. Heather?
I yield.
Did I say your name right that time? I'm always concerned I'm going to say your name.
80, like the number.
E. Okay, got it. Every time I get it wrong, you yell at me. It's fine. I'll move on. I don't want to get it right. Heather?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest, to me, it would make sense if this recommendation was split in two, because there's a cultivation, so a growing aspect here in terms of what's added to substrates that they're grown in, and then there's the, again, more concerned for the product side when you're talking about an additive, but such as an FDA inactive ingredient database approved additive. That's really, again, that's not relevant to cultivating. That's only relevant to the actual final product. So to me, it makes more sense to split this up and maybe not use the word additive for both. Additive is very common in food terminology. But maybe instead of saying additive during cultivation, maybe say, I don't have perfect words, but something like permissible and impermissible nutrients or growing substrates, just to again clarify that we're talking about two different things.
What if we use the word adulterant instead of additives?
That might work.
We'll keep discussing this, Brian.
Yeah, if you do add adulterant, then I think it'd be helpful to define it. But I think we were kind of getting there with Hamilton's comments and your comments, Dr. Connor. But I think the distinction with potency versus intoxicating effect, maybe there's a way to clarify the language that when you say intoxicating effect, you don't mean potency, right? So like, because you're specifically talking about encouraging cultivation, which would be, if you have, an additive that doesn't change, the effects of the mushroom, but increases the potency, that's fine. I don't know a way to say that better, but I think that was probably what the sub was getting at with that.
I think that's true. Dr. Hendricks.
Oh, sorry. I had a quick question about this. So, Ken, I'm thinking, I'm looking at you here too. I know that there's some interest in this so-called, Stamets stack where you might ingest a psilocybin mushroom along with lion's mane and maybe niacin. And I think Paul has some ideas about this in some way, potentiating the effect of psilocybin. Would this be the sort of thing that would be relevant to number 6 here? Like, would this prevent somebody from selling psilocybe mushroom along with lion's mane, which would be considered maybe a culinary mushroom in most cases?
I don't think that this would prohibit that action. No, I think it's this idea of trying to make sure people are trying to artificially increase the intoxicating effect of the natural medicine by, again, like spraying something on it that would make it more intoxicating. I'm trying to stay with the word potent because that's not what we're talking. But I don't see this rule as prohibiting combination with other mushrooms, no, especially culinary mushrooms. Digum? Digum, you're still on mute.
Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say that I agree with what Heather was saying about bifurcating between cultivation and products. And I think that it's a little bit of a rabbit hole on both sides as we're experiencing this conversation, and being able to be specific on both sides, I think is really important.
I think we're going to split 6, and Sam, let me know if you're ready. In here, we'll just talk it through. So 6, I think, should say the division should promulgate rules that define permissible and impermissible practices during the cultivation of natural medicine, which may include defining acceptable substrates, period.
Can you repeat that last part?
I'm going to have to do the whole thing. Sorry. The division should promulgate rules that define permissible and impermissible practices for the cultivation of natural medicine, which may include defining permissible substrates, period. I think if we write it that way, it would also allow us to eliminate 7, because the division could decide whether they want to prohibit manure or permit manure if we allow that flexibility the way I've just defined it. That'd be the old number 7, now number 8 on Sam's script. I think the second part of that sentence, the division should prohibit the use of additives that increase harm or intoxicating effects of natural medicines, should be moved to the product's recommendation. And I think that the new 7 will be the division should permit the use of other of additives such as inactive ingredients from the FDA's inactive ingredient database, or additive to substrate that encourage cultivation without changing the natural medicine's intoxicating effects or increasing harm, but which may change its potency profile, period.
Sorry, one more time on 7.
7, the division should permit the use of additives, such as inactive ingredients for the FDA's inactive ingredient database, or additives to substrate that encourage cultivation without changing the natural medicine's intoxicating effect or increasing harm, but which may change its potency profile, period. There you go. Ryan.
Maybe instead of using the word intoxicating effect or the intoxicating, we change it to psychoactive. I mean, I would defer to everyone here, but that might get what you're getting at, Dr. Connor, where if you add another, if you add THC, it's got a different psychoactive effect rather than intoxicating, which could be confused with potency.
Hamilton's nodding, so I'm assuming Hamilton, you like the idea of psychoactive instead of intoxicating?
I think these words need to be defined in the context.
I don't know exactly. Oops. Did you guys lose me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay. I don't know exactly what the right words are here, but whatever words are chosen need to be defined in the context of this, of this suggestion, because it is confusing to me. Like psychoactive, like potency is directly related to psychoactivity and intoxicating effects. So, yeah, I don't have a good answer, but that it's still not entirely clear.
Thanks. We'll keep working on it. 80.
My recommendation would be to just strike the term changing the natural medicine's intoxicating effect and just focus on increasing the harm, which may change its potency profile, because that completely obviates the whole intoxication, psychoactivity, da 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 da. It's totally fine to have a potent mushroom during the cultivation process if it's properly labeled and disclosed to the client upon ingestion. You can still have a 20 milligram total psilocybin exposure with a very small amount of highly potent product versus a larger amount of a less potent product. So this is kind of moot and pointless. The point is decreasing the harm while acknowledging that, you know, there is going to be a drive for yield, potency, right? Using resources efficiently to create the most active pharmaceutical ingredients.
I agree. Let's strike changing the natural medicine's intoxicating effect, or thanks, Adrian. And then I'm just bothered by the it's, so we could change, which may change the natural medicine's potency profile would make me feel, I don't like it. No, I know I said it, Sam. I'm not trying to, like, I know it's me. Just, I just want to see if now that we've rewritten 6 and 7 this way, do we need 8? Because I think that 8 is now encompassed in 6, which says the division should promulgate rules that define permissible and impermissible practices for the cultivation of natural medicine, which may include defining permissible substrates. I don't think 8 needs to be on its own if we have that there. And I just want to see if there's agreement or disagreement on that. Getting head nods and thumbs ups. So I think we just strike 8, if that's all right with everybody. If you have an objection to that, please voice it now. All right, seeing none, let's go ahead and strike. And then Sam, were you able to move that middle sentence down to products? We'll get back to it if you were able to.
Yeah, I put it at the top of products.
All right, thanks. So now we just need reasons for 6 and 7, and we can move. Any suggested language for and we also still want, so Hamilton, the changes we made by striking intoxicating at all, does that address your concerns? Is it more clear now?
Yeah, it is more clear.
All right, so I'm going to take a stab at reasoning for 6. Again, I think, well, hold on. We proposed this rule so that there can be standardization of the cultivation practices used in the regulated market.
Yes.
Any objection to that language, or does that seem to capture when we make this regulation, this recommendation? I'm not seeing objections, so I'm going to go ahead and move us to number 7. If you do have an objection to the reasoning for number 6, let me know. Good. So again, 7, the division should permit the use of additives such as inactive ingredients from the FDA's inactive ingredient database or additives to substrate that encourage cultivation without increasing harm, which may change the natural medicine's potency profile. Reasoning, we propose this recommendation to allow for innovation in the cultivation practices of natural medicine. Again, if there's objections to that language, please let us know. Let me know. Otherwise, we can move forward. Yeah.
7 reads funny to me. I mean, initially it was trying to say we shouldn't be adding things that are going to change the potency, and now it sounds like we're encouraging people to add things to change the potency.
Yep. Do you have a suggested way to reword it?
It just reads funny. I have to think about it longer.
Yeah. What about if we just moved that which may that became so division should permit the use of additives such as inactive ingredients when the FDA's inactive ingredient database are added to substrate. Actually, yeah, I think we could just end without increasing R, period, right?
Yeah, I think that would be better.
Because it doesn't need to be stipulated that we could change the potency profile. It doesn't.
Right.
Just strike the rest and leave it there unless there's object.
Amen.
Everybody good with 6 and 7, both as written and with reasons?
Yeah.
We're getting through this. We have let's see how fast we can get through the 5 recommendations for labeling. I don't think there's been many changes here. But just have a look at these 5 and see how you feel about these. And then reading the reasons for why we're proposing that I draft. I'll wait to see if there are hands for any changes you want to 1 through 5 for labeling. Hamilton.
So it's all about potency and Best Buy and these all seem very practical. What about like strain names and people are going to start changing the names of these strains as part of like marketing and stuff like that, and there's all these hybrid strains coming out now. Does the genetic lineage matter to the labeling process at all, so people know, okay, I prefer this strain over that strain, kind of thing? Has this been a discussion?
We haven't had that discussion, and I think now would be a good time to have it and see. Adi, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that could actually be antithetical to the purpose of this. If the purpose is to create a commercial market where marketing is indeed a value and a commonly accepted practice, great, then go for it. But if we're simply focusing on facilitating, meaningful experiences for people, that it may be detrimental to disclose that or require at least that kind of information. If brands want to put that kind of information on the label, fine. But I think requiring it is not necessary because it could, potentially backfire by creating demand. And I don't know that we're trying to build demand into the regulations.
Yeah, I think I lean more towards the idea of saying we're not prohibiting it, but I don't know that we want to require it. And I wonder if there's anyone like Hamilton, would you make the argument that we should require it?
No. I think there's definitely something to be said about knowing what you're consuming, like all of these rules are designed to do. But the naming thing is really a slippery slope. I think it's, people are just going to make up names over time, and there won't be any genetic lineage involved in those naming processes.
Yeah, I see that point. Ken?
Yeah, I would actually argue more on the side of not including what the different strain names for the reason that Hamilton just suggested, is that there's no standardization of anything regarding strain names. I think it's a red herring, and we shouldn't have that information involved.
Thanks, Ken. Adi?
Yeah, along those same lines, we've seen this in cannabis for many years. If we're going to require a genetic lineage, then that requires a genotype, which requires the testing. So I think that would be burdensome.
Agreed. I do think that if the rules change in subsequent years where we're allowing for other species, that species should be labeled, but I think we're not at that point right now, and so I don't think we need to get there. And species is something that has to be tested for. So if we're adding species, we're already testing for it, but we'll revisit that. The one thing that I noticed after the discussions we've just had is that we don't require anything on labeling for requiring individuals to disclose if they've added anything to the product. And I don't know if we want to make that recommendation here or not. I just noticed that based on the discussion we just had, we don't have a requirement that people label, include the label any additives. But so I'm just wondering if that's necessary. Hamilton.
What about like pesticides or fungicides that are used in the cultivation process? I mean, these don't necessarily create harm under our other discussion. There are, allowable amounts even under the organic standards of the USDA, the National Organic Program. But I would want to know if my mushrooms were sprayed with a pesticide, even if it was in the allowable category.
Let's hear from others about requiring that products be labeled with pesticides or fungicides that might be used on them. Katie, your hand is up. I don't know if you were going to speak to that point.
Yeah, I think this is a chicken and egg with the products recommendations, because if we in the products section are saying no additives are allowed, then it's moot, because if they're not allowed, then there's no need to put them on the label. If we are going to decide that we're going to allow any kind of additives, then yeah, obviously, then there should be a requirement that those additives are listed.
And that would be at the product phase, not necessarily at the cultivation phase. But do you have a comment on whether we should talk about pesticides or fungicides that are used on the products?
I don't have the domain expertise to comment on that.
Thanks. Nigo?
Let's just. I have a different comment, which I'm happy to input after we finish this discussion. But yeah, I have mixed feelings about the topic we're currently on. I'll reserve for now.
Okay, thanks, Brian.
Just following off of Dr. Ray's comments just now, so I just want to reiterate that these are just recommendations to the regulators, so they could reject one, take another. So with that in mind, if you think it's worth having pesticides disclosed in the label, I would make that as a separate recommendation, because for all we know, DOR is going to decide they just want to reject the additives recommendation that the board is making to the regulator. So if you think it's worth it, I would just make the recommendation itself.
Okay, let me see if I can word a recommendation here that I might use, and then we can decide whether we want to keep it or not. Sam, let me know when you're ready to type. So this will be recommendation number 6 under. So labels should contain information on any additives, including active and inactive ingredients, pesticides and fungicides, that are used in the cultivation or production of the natural medicine.
Do that one more time for me.
Labels should contain information on any additives, including active and inactive ingredients, and pesticides and fungicides that may have been used in the production or in the cultivation or production of the natural medicine, period. That may have been used in the cultivation or production of the natural medicine, period. I would have it read such as active and inactive ingredients, and pesticides and fungicide. Not striking such as. So Sam's cleaning all that up. Nick, did you have a comment about this, or are you holding for the next up? Ken?
I don't really like this. I would just not add it. And I would argue it would probably be easier to just forbid the use of pesticides. That's what people are looking for in a natural medicine anyway, is the lack of those kinds of substances. And it's easy to grow mushrooms without them.
Does that include fungicides too? Sorry, the lack of knowledge for me. You would say
Yeah, you would never use a fungicide around trying to grow mushrooms. It would just cause problems.
Okay. Thanks, Ken. Skyler?
Yeah, just seconding what Ken said. You might find a very long list of inactive additives in a substrate, anything from calcium to B vitamins, tryptophan was mentioned earlier. So, I don't think straw. There's a lot of things that people might add that would be considered inactive. And yeah, fungicides are a scary thing to a mycologist. We tend to avoid them like the plague. And pesticides. I could imagine somebody using it, but it would be no big deal to not allow them.
Okay, thanks. Katie?
Yeah, all of those comments assuage my concerns. I would say if you are going to leave this in the recommendations, that you would focus on things that are potentially toxic, right? So tryptophan as an additive is not toxic, but some of these other pesticides or fungicides might be toxic. My preference, though, would be to just strike it.
Thanks, Jacob.
One comment is about numbers 2 and 3. So I don't know if we're ready for that. Just let me know.
Yeah, just hold for those right now. All right, so let's go ahead and strike 6, and then I'm going to ask to Hamilton. Go ahead.
Well, it's my concern is what the AD said. I can't remember his name. Sorry, but this is all assuming that additives are not allowed generally overall. And if the committee says, okay, everything has to be organically cultivated, then obviously we don't need number 6. But if they don't mention that specifically, then we do need a kind of number 6. And I've seen a number of large mushroom cultivation operations all over the world that do use these kinds of chemicals to increase yields. And I just, I think it's okay if it's organic, great, we don't need it. Otherwise, we need something with this language.
So we could go back to the cultivation section and we could make the recommendation that pesticides and fungicides should not be permitted in the cultivation of natural medicine. Would that solve your concern, Hamilton? And do we think that's a good recommendation to make? So here I'm looking for opposition to adding a recommendation. Go ahead, Brian.
I have no position on it, but just want to say that if you do make that recommendation of don't let them use those, you could also just add a clause that says, to the extent that regulator decides to, it should be on the label.
Okay, that's a good solution. So we can scroll back up to cultivation. We're going to add a new recommendation on cultivation, so I think it'll be recommendation number 8 now. We'll be claiming. So the division should prohibit the use of pesticides and fungicides in the cultivation of natural medicine. And then comma, in the event that they decide to permit the use of these, then this information should be included in the label of the natural medicine.
Okay. Yeah.
So I know it's a lot of pressure to have us all watching you type. I'll have you change the then and then on the label instead of in the label, if you don't mind. Include it on the label of the natural method. Thoughts, comments, objections to this recommendation? I give you reasoning and a second as well, Sam, when you're ready. So we propose this recommendation to follow best practices for the cultivation of mushroom or natural medicines and to reduce harms that may be associated with the use of these substances. Again, it's typing that out. If anyone has alterations they want to make to that language or objections or suggest changes, I'd love to hear them.
Did you say that last part? Reduce the
harms that are associated with the use of these chemicals during the cultivation process. That's not exactly what I said, but it gets there. Do you have any objections, any comments, any changes to the language you just dropped? You'll think about it. I want to once again thank you all for your active participation in this process. It's been really good. And Nick, as soon as we get this one sorted, we'll go back to the products or labeling section. You can tell us your concerns for points. I think you said 1 and 2 or 2 and 3.
Oh yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, we propose this recommendation to follow best practices of the cultivation of natural medicine and reduce the harms associated with these chemicals in the cultivation of natural medicine.
I'm fine with that language. Unless someone objects, just your one misspelling for recommendation. Otherwise, again, it was like
No, at this point, I don't.
Objections to adding this to our list of recommendations? Any changes to the language? Any concern? And Sam, while we're here, this is going to bother me. If you can, for point 7, just add a carriage return or move reasoning down to its own line so it's the same format as every other. Thanks. I get a little obsessed about that stuff. I apologize.
No, you're good. No, I appreciate you catching it.
As soon as Sam percent, we'll scroll back to labeling 1. And I think Nick, you said 2 and 3.
Correct.
Yeah. So go ahead. What's your?
Yeah, so I'm just gonna look at this again to make sure I'm not speaking out of turn here. Yeah, so 2 and 3, just the way it's written, I can't tell if it's just written confusingly or if it's actually multiplying incorrectly. So psilocin, on line 3 of 2, psilocin already has a lower molecular weight. So you don't, the way it's worded, it's like dropping the weight of psilocin, which is already lower, and then basically like the multiplication and division is like, the way I read it is backwards on 2 and 3. So I'm not sure how exact this needs to be. I'm sure someone's going to check the nuances of this later, but maybe it's like over. I don't want to be like overbearing. Maybe we should like put an example in parentheses or something. I just think it should be clear because that's written chemically on the molecular weight. It's not clear.
And go ahead.
Yeah, when it says this is calculated in both of those paragraphs, it should be changed to psilocin is calculated by something percent psilocybin and multiplying by 0.19. And then down below, it would be psilocybin is calculated or by dividing by 0.719. So if you got rid of this, I think that would help a lot.
Yeah, that would be good. And then also, I believe we agreed on the prior meetings where Davis brought this forward. We agreed that the overall potency should be listed equivalent to psilocybin because that's what people are familiar with. In both, so if one recommendation, I understand having 2 bullets about altering one measurement, but they should both be about having the equivalence in psilocin, or excuse me, in psilocybin.
Well, so the discussion actually was that where we landed was we wanted both because psilocin represents the psychoactive ingredient in the natural medicine, but psilocybin represents the metric that most people are familiar with. And so to cover our bases, we were going to recommend that both be included in the label. And I don't necessarily want to relitigate that point unless there's a strong opposition to having both on the label, because we'd had a really lengthy discussion on having both in the label. But Ken, I don't know if your hands up for a minute if you want to add more.
No, I like having both. I would say maybe something should say potential psilocybin, total potential psilocybin, because psilocin never gets converted back. I mean, as things do. Anyway, to clarify that when you're summing things up, you're just converting.
Right.
It might be.
I think we'll make some changes to the language to clarify, but I do want it to make sure that I think we should keep both points on the label. And so,
yes.
So you agree. Okay, Skylar?
Yeah, so I think that maybe it should actually be 3. You know, you have at time of harvest, psilocybin, psilocin, and then the equation of potential psilocin. So that way you have the conversion from psilocybin to psilocin, so you kind of get an idea of total potency, but you can have, you know, the 2 factors that were present. Basically, the parts of the equation are printed as well.
So Scott. In psilocin and psilocybin on the label. And I know it's confusing, but the idea is to say, so if you look at point 4 says the data potency should be relates total possible potency in psilocin, and we landed on both of those should be on the label in a total amount and in their individual amount. So that's what I was trying to capture in what I wrote. I don't know if that helps it explain it to everybody, or if it's still really
there. Well, real quick, I think you got basically the total psilocybin potency is going to be whatever the lab determines is the potency of psilocybin. So there's not necessarily any equation necessary for that. The only equation necessary is for the potential psilocin, which is when the body converts psilocybin into psilocin.
Thanks, Scott. Yeah, we're just trying to capture in both psilocin and psilocybin the total potential exposure to psilocin that may be possible, and that's what we're trying to capture. Jacob?
So now there's like multiple issues arising. My initial comment is simply about the calculation. The way that sentence is, I think the calculation is backwards. Like, for example, on 3, this is calculated by summing the percent psilocin with the percent psilocybin divided by 0.719. So dividing psilocybin by 0.719. Oh, excuse me. So it maybe listening to what you just said, you're wanting the total psilocin equivalent.
Let me see if I can clean up the language, and then we'll come back to it. So
Sure, I'm totally cool with that, and I'm happy, Dr. Connor, to be of direct support in reviewing or feeding anything back on the chemistry.
But so I think the one problem that I noticed as I was reading this as well, which is to say there's a point two, I think should say products should have labels that detail potency in both milligrams of psilocybin and psilocin, and then total potency in psilocybin by converting the percent psilocin to psilocybin so that participants are aware of total potency. Does that help clarify it all or make it even more confused?
I agree, because just from what you were saying verbally and then what's written, I think that that's missing. And then also from the prior conversation, and I could be misremembering, but I thought that our what we decided was because all the research and because people are just familiar with psilocybin, that the total was in psilocybin equivalents, which I think is what you just said too, right?
Yeah, but yeah, so the where we landed was most people understand it in terms of psilocybin, but the better metric to fully understand it is to have it in psilocin. So then we decided we would do both. And I think we just need to clarify the language to make sure it's clear. So I think in psilocybin, by converting the percent psilocin to psilocybin, so that participants are aware of total potency, period. And I think it's just, I think same the second sentence, I would have it start with the percent. So this. So am I unmuting now? Yeah, I just want to make sure. So total potency is calculated by summing the percent. Yeah, I think if you start it that way. So total potency in psilocybin is calculated by summing the percent psilocybin with the percent psilocin multiplied by 0.719. Does that make it more clear? Question mark. Jacob?
Oh, well, so if we're going to label both the psilocybin level, the psilocin level, then the total level in psilocybin equivalents, and then the total level in psilocin equivalents. Is that what we're saying?
Yes.
So in that case, I hate to say this or elongate it, I don't think that this language is perfectly clear for that. I think there's definitely a way to write that, and it may actually be kind of in the way that I just mentioned. I forget who was saying earlier that it may require 3 bullet points. And also, I'll defer to you, Dr. Connor, if this is something we should work through now, or if this is something that would be more productive to draft offline.
Well, if we can get 3 corrected and see if we can look at both of them in combination. So Sam, if you could jump down at 3, I think it should say products should have labels that detail potency in both milligrams psilocybin and psilocin, and then total potency in psilocin by converting the percent psilocybin to percent psilocin so that participants are aware of total potency. And then total potency in psilocin is calculated by summing the percent psilocin with the percent psilocybin divided by 0.719. I don't think 3 bullet points gets us there, but I could be wrong. And I'm just wondering again from other people if this is more clear. And Kyle, I know you've had your hand up for a while, so I'm going to come to you, Kyle.
Yeah, thank you. And I will try to think about my conversation with Davis and where we landed, because we did speak much about this. And so my understanding is the test result should provide us the psilocybin and the psilocin in the product at the time. Then the concern is that the psilocybin will get converted to psilocin, and that is what could result in a psychoactive impacts. So therefore, the discussion was that it would maybe important to have the total potential psilocin on there. So I get, maybe that's the third, but I think I would agree with what Skylar said in the fact that you would just, there shouldn't be a formula or conversion for psilocybin. It should just be the test result for psilocybin. And then if there was a formula, it would be to demonstrate the total active psilocin.
But that's what this says now as written. Ken, your hand is up and your hand is up. So I'll come to you because I think that means you really want to talk.
Yes, yes, this language is way too complicated and confusing. 2 and 3 need to be combined, and I would say something like product labeling should include psilocin acid, psilocybin acid, total potential psilocin, total potential psilocybin equivalent. And I would just leave it at that. You could then have a sentence below that explains how you calculate the total potential psilocin and psilocybin.
Well, Sam's trying to take that out. I'm sure to come back to you. I'll ask Katie for their comment.
Yeah, I think that, there's a trade-off. In transparency, you get confusion. So one thing that you could consider is making a decision about whether you want to have psilocybin equivalent or psilocin equivalent on the label, but not both. And if you want to phrase that as total potential psychoactivity or total potential potency, those are also options. But I think that including both psilocybin equivalent and psilocin equivalent is just room for confusion. Reporting milligrams of psilocin and psilocybin, I would think would be in number 2. And then in number 3 would be one of the two, either total psilocin, total psychoactivity, or total psilocybin equivalent. I yield.
Thanks, Eddie. Nick, I'm going to go to Heather, and I'll come back to you. Heather?
Yeah, I agree with what AD was saying. I don't think it makes sense to have both a total psilocybin and psilocin as labeling. I don't think that's helpful, and I think it's confusing. And frankly, there is no such thing as total potential psilocybin, right? I know that's the term consumers are familiar with, but again, I think it makes the most sense to label the measured amount of psilocybin, the measured amount of psilocin, and then a total potential psilocin of that as the active substance. And if it helps to label it in a way for the consumer, again, where we say it's the total potential intoxicating compound, or I don't like the word potency because it's not a dosage, so potency is misapplied for both natural medicines and cannabis. But again, I understand the point, but actually putting a calculated number for potential psilocybin is not accurate.
So I think, Nate, I'm going to try to reword these things and then come back to you if that's okay. So let's start with 2, where 2 will say product should have labels that detail potency in both milligrams of psilocybin and psilocin, period, and delete the rest of that, point 2. So this captures the idea of reporting milligrams of psilocybin and milligrams of psilocin present at the time of potency testing. Is everyone okay with that as ending here? And the reasoning stays the same. All right, so then point 3, which now we're back here. Should say products should have labels that detail this a total psychoactive compound present. And we might change that language, but let me start with that. Total psychoactive compound present at the time of potency testing. Strike potency in both. They'll just say in milligrams of psilocin. Just change that to testing in milligrams of psilocin. Sorry, let go of the space bar for a second. And you'll strike and then potency in psilocin. All of that gets struck to the period. And then it just says total potency in psilocin is calculated by summing the percent psilocin with the percent psilocybin divided by 0.719. Let's see, once you get that all cleared up, Sam, if that clarifies things for people, and if we agree that this is what the recommendation we want to make. So let's read 2 and 3 and see if this captures the conversation. The reasoning on 2 should say this, both that persons can understand how much of the psychoactive ingredient or psychoactive compound they are ingesting. again, here, if you have comment or concern or questions about the way 2 and 3 are written now, go ahead and put your hand up. Sam, in point 3, I think we just lost the period between Solosa and the word total where you saw the capital T. Kyle, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I think I'm with. I think with Macom on this was that it should be multiplied rather than divided. I think it should be multiplied.
Yeah, I was just looking at that too.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you're right, because you're multiplying by yeah, you're right. So it should be percent psilocybin multiplied by 0.719. Sorry, thank you. And I think you just change the multiplier places the percent psilocybin on the same scale as percent psilos in the prints. Not the percent there, Sam. Should be percent. So you have it right. It's multiplied by 0.719, and then change the divisor in the parens to the multiplier. 80.
I just have minor comments on rationale under number 3. This is proposed so that cultivators, processors, facilitators, and participants, this is going, the benefit is for the participants. So add participants to the reasoning. Also change the word potency to total psychoactivity or strength.
Can we come back to that for a second? I just want to make sure that, so in the parentheses, the multiplier places, and then this divisor or percentage symbol that stays.
Yeah, everything else stays. You're just dropping the word divisor.
Okay.
Yep, that all looks good to me. And then, yeah, 80, I think I have your language still in my head, so I think we can get it. So this would be reasoning for point 3, Sam, which is to say, this is proposed that cultivators, producers, facilitators, and participants may better understand. Yeah, and participants may better understand the amount of psychoactive compound in the natural medicine that is being administered. Is that captured, 80?
No, I would say the amount is covered under number 2. What we're talking about here is the potential subjective effects, the magnitude of the effects. So I would say rather, instead of understand the amount, I would say understand the degree of psychoactivity.
I like that. Understand the degree of psychoactivity of the natural medicine that is being administered. So wait, you need to keep the understand though, Sam. May better understand the degree of psychoactivity of the natural medicine being administered.
Yes.
Better understand the degree.
Yes.
Of psychoactivity. So in between understand and degree, put the word the, just because I'm going to be obsessional about it, Sam. And then you're going to strike everything until, so it should say the degree of the psychoactivity of, so strike everything till the natural medicine that is being administered and add the word of. So the degree of the psychoactivity of the natural medicine that is being administered. Is that captured, 80?
Yes.
Thank you.
I would also say this is super minor, but the prior to psychoactivity is superfluous.
I agree. The degree of psychoactivity of the natural medicine being administered. So I keep also unhitting and hitting the space bar.
Sorry. Okay.
Just
a second.
The degree of. It may better understand the degree of psychoactivity of the natural medicine that is being administered. That's it.
Yes.
So reviewing all of these to see if you have comments, concerns, or questions about 2 and 3, Peter?
I was lost and thought about this for a little bit. Forgive me if I'm repeating what was said. I don't think this has been said. It seems like it could be helpful from a harm reduction perspective to communicate maybe concisely that despite the labeling around degree of psychoactivity, that response could vary from person to person and from moment to moment. And the best practice, of course, would be to start with what might be
the lowest expected psychoactive dose rather than to immediately jump off into a very large dose that could be overwhelming or harmful. I think there's been some wording around that with cannabis, but I don't know if there's some way of appropriately communicating that we don't really yet understand how psilocybin functions from one individual to the next, and so people should exercise caution.
Yeah, I think actually I don't think it needs to necessarily be on a label, because we're not going to be selling these in a retail market. We're selling them they're being administered in a regulated market. And so facilitators will be trained to share that information through the informed consent process with participants rather than needing to place it on a label. Does that satisfy your concerns, Peter?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so again, I'm conscious of the timing. What I want to do is, Steve, are we good with 1 through 5 now? And here, I just ask you to put up your hand if you have any concerns, questions, or comments about 1 through 5. I'll wait for a minute or two to see if everyone does. I think we're in good shape, but I want to make sure I'm capturing everyone's concerns. I'm not seeing any hands coming up. Still giving you all some time to review it. What we have left is one recommendation for disposal, and we have 5 recommendations for products. We could take a 10-minute break and come back and do those, or we could try to push through and get done with it and be done with the meeting. I don't have a strong preference, and so what I ask you to do real quick is, if you want to take a break right now for 10 minutes, just raise your hand in the chat. Let's get a sense of how people want to take a break, or if you want to try to push through and get it done and be done a little bit earlier. But I see a couple of hands for breaks, and I want to be conscious of people's needs for breaks. So let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break. It's 3:02 on my clock now. We'll come back at 3:12 Mountain Standard Time. Just as a reminder, while we're on break, please mute your camera and your microphone. Again, we'll take a break from 3:02 p.m. Mountain Standard Time to 3:12 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Okay, everybody, we're back from break. And just picking up where we left off, we have one recommendation for disposal, and let's have you review that, see if you have any concerns. Give me your hand is still up, but I don't know if that's a remnant or if that's a comment for the disposal piece. I don't know. You're back yet. Lady?
Yeah, I think number one, scientific data that adheres to research best practices for such research is a little confusing and potentially indefensible. Like there are lots of different practices that are used in research. So maybe we might want to clarify that the producer is able to attest with peer-reviewed evidence that a product is, if there's a paper in the peer-reviewed evidence that demonstrates a lack of toxicity or safety, that might be good. But, I think that adhering to research best practices is a little hand-wavy.
So I think you're fine to say, we'll go say we're going to be is able to attest with peer-reviewed scientific data that a product that is consumed using a method other than oral ingestion is safe for human consumption. That's
my concern. Yes, thank you.
And say peer-reviewed would be hyphenated? Would it be hyphenated? It would be hyphenated. You can strike, yes. So peer-reviewed scientific data and you can strike that adheres to research best practices for such research. So you're until the next that a product. You're striking to that a product. Backwards. You're keeping that a product. You're striking to research that. Sorry. So striking from that adheres to the word research. Everything else stays. Oh, sorry, the second research. I apologize, Sam. There's multiple researches. That adheres to research practices for such research is all being struck because I sound like an idiot the way I wrote that. There you go. Nope, just to research. Yep, that's it. Jacob? Still maybe an artifact. Okay, go ahead. Heather?
Yeah, and I'm sorry that this is on a different subject within the listing to find here, but related to the prohibiting solvents, and then in number 3, sorry, so number 3, and then in 4 and 5, it also references extraction. So I guess I'm asking what the board is meaning by the term extraction, because, and then also meaning by solvents, because water is a solvent. So the way I would read this, I would say you could not make a tea out of a powder because you would be extracting cannabinoids using a solvent.
Not cannabinoids, but yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, you know.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I just want to make sure. Yeah, and so this is where we got to. So actually, that's a good question. Ken, is your point on this topic or something else?
No, it's the previous one. Why don't you just drop it after oral ingestion? What only natural medicine products that can be orally ingested shall be available in the regulated market at this time.
I think this may be one of the meetings where we unfortunately didn't have you present, but there was a lengthy discussion around if an individual can attest to the safety of a consumption by another method, then they should be allowed to do so to allow for innovation or free in the market. Because if we regulate it the way you suggest, Ken, then it would be a year, and then you have to go through a rulemaking process in order to change to any other method of administration.
Yeah, I would still be fine for that for the first year, but whatever.
Yeah, I hear you, but I think we went back and forth a little bit. I think we'll leave it here unless I hear other strong objections. Hamilton?
I have to go pretty soon, but I have questions about 5 and 6. And I don't really understand what it means to... This is like in the reasoning of 5 and 6, it says this is being proposed to distinguish between production and preparation and to provide a path from common preparations. And so I guess what I'm asking is, are these treatment centers allowed to make tea?
So that's what 5 and 6 are trying to capture. So you put 4, 5, and 6 together, and basically what 4, 5, and 6 are trying to do is say that people should be using whole fruiting bodies or powdered mushrooms, and that preparation is not part of production. So that you could make a tea following 5 and 6 because they allow for preparation that is not production. And so again, this is me trying to write these things after the lengthy conversation. So 4 prohibits extraction of psilocybin or psilocin from natural fruiting bodies or from powdered mushroom products into some other type of product. Whereas 5 and 6 would permit them the preparation of the whole fruiting body or the powder into a tea using water. That's what I was trying to capture in 4, 5, and 6. Does that make sense?
It makes sense the way you said it now, but at the core, a tea is an extraction process. I don't know how much that actually matters in this language, but a tea is a water extraction.
Right. And so, anyway, so I guess I would seek help in clarifying the language, because I think the goal here was to prohibit the production of the manufacture of products that are a significant deviation from whole fruiting body or from powder, but not prohibit the ability to make tea, for instance, or to make some other preparation. So I'm just trying to differentiate the idea of preparation versus production in some way. I appreciate any help with language in that area. Alice?
I'll let you stick on this topic. Mine's on a different point.
I'll circle back. 80.
Yeah, I think one potential fix for this would be, and I think I'm looking at a different version, where it says,
The only difference in your version and our version is numbering because Sam moved one recommendation down. So you're just off by a number. That's all.
okay, so let's see. What you might say it is extraction of psilocybin from mushroom fruiting bodies from powdered or mushroom fruiting bodies using solvents other than water or fruit juice. Because we want to potentially leave room for citrus juice. We know that this is a common method of administration that's currently prohibited in Oregon. So if that's the concern, then we can say that solvents other than water and fruit juice are prohibited. Either that, or you'll have to go through a crazy cat and mouse game of, oh, here's a new solvent. Okay, let's ban that solvent. Oh, here's a new solvent. Okay, let's ban that solvent. So being explicit about which solvents are permitted is great, but then you'll also need to fix number 5, taking out the whole thing about extraction, because, you know, as others have said, both steeping in water or fruit juice is by definition an extraction.
Thanks, 80.
I think technically you're correct, but in common parlance, using water is not considered a solvent, and no one would prohibit making tea. I think this is getting overly obsessive. And typically when people would be adding lemon juice, for example, they would still be eating the mushrooms. No one is putting it through a filter and just taking the little bit of juice that comes through and extracting. Are people doing that?
Yes.
Okay, I haven't seen that.
I think the 4 is fine with the addition unless there's objections. So if we want to consider, just to be all inclusive, then I like the 80's addition to 4. Are there objections before we get to 5 and 6? Let's just see. Are there objections to adding other than water or fruit juice to 4?
No objection.
And Allison, I'm just tracking your hand is for another point, right? So I got it. I just want to make sure, so if you want to get into this conversation, you have to change that or wave at me or just unmute and start talking, right? But I'm tracking that you want to come back to that. Okay. So then and now in 5 and 6, what we want to do is make sure that people understand. But I guess if we allow for the water or fruit juice, then hold on. Let me just take. Do we just end with ingestible products, period, and remove that the do not involve extraction of any kind? Or no, do we just strike do not involve extraction of any kind? Does that satisfy? I'm getting a nod from 80. Yeah. Hamilton?
Yes.
Good. Okay. I think we strike it in both 5 and 6 then. Hamilton?
I just need to say thank you to everyone, and I need to go.
Thanks for coming. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Okay, so for remove the do not involve extraction of any kind, but leave and that do not enhance, which I guess would do not. So adjustable products that do not enhance the intoxicating effects of the natural medicine would still be important, and I'll come back to why. But yeah, so strike that all, Sam. So make ingestible products that do not enhance the intoxicating effects of natural medicine. Yep. In both 5 and 6. And here, I don't know if there's objections. 80, go ahead.
Number 1, I would change intoxicating to psychoactive in both. But I would also argue that this is problematic because one of the benefits of one of the benefits of citric acid juice is that it changes the duration, shortens the duration, and increases or also decreases the latency to onset. So you are creating differences in psychoactive effects, but that's not necessarily increasing harm. So I think we want to be really careful here with what we're trying to accomplish.
So here again, the idea would be to say we don't want someone to make tea and mix in other psychoactive substances into the tea, right? And that's what we're trying to avoid. And it's not, I agree with you. I think that the citric acid part is useful and relevant. It doesn't, I'm not worried about people using citric acid to change the psychoactive profile, but it's more with this idea that they would add alcohol to the tea, or they would add, I don't know, fentanyl to the tea or something like that. And that's what we're trying to prohibit. And so if someone can suggest language that would capture that, like maybe it's the idea that ingestible products that do not add any other psychoactive compounds. I don't, maybe that captures it, but that's what we're trying to avoid, is this idea of adding other drugs, essentially. And maybe that's what it needs to say. Well,
that's precisely what I would recommend then. If that is your goal, then, change one of these to be specifically prohibiting the addition of, additives which would amplify the effects of the natural medicine.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember so the difference between 5 and 6 is 5 is it's happening in a healing center, and 6 is it's a facilitator who may be operating in an authorized location other than a healing center. So 5 permits the healing center to assist the participant, and 6 permits it. So to make it clear why 5 and 6 are different, we could add language to 6 that says licensed facilitators who are facilitating natural medicine administration in an authorized location other than a licensed healing center are permitted in an authorized location other than a licensed healing center. Just because that's the language to be consistent. Authorized location other than a licensed healing center are That's why 5 and 6 are different. And then I'll come back to changing the intoxicating effects language. Well, Sam, while you finalize that addition to 6. So everyone understands the difference between 5 and 6. So then it is. Let me just unmute and think. I'm going to mute and think. So I think we just make. And there's 2 ways to do this: either to change the recommendations 5 and 6 to include the language, or to make a new recommendation, which is to say that no, I think we'll do it. Oh, see, this thinking and talking at the same time gets you in trouble. So something like that: do not add any other psychoactive compounds to the natural medicine. 80, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, maybe a new number 5, which applies to both licensed healing centers and licensed facilitators. At no time, can the product be adulterated, or at no time can additives be included to enhance the psychoactive effects. And then in the reasoning, we would say, for example, natural medicine cannot be combined with cannabis, alcohol, or other psychoactive substances. That's one potential fix.
Yeah, I agree. Define additive so we don't rule out things like lemon or acidic acid things. Yeah.
Okay. Nor would it rule out things like lion's mane again.
Yeah. So yeah, we just have a definition of additives that says, we're talking about things that are inherently psychoactive. Oh, you're saying lion's mane is psychoactive?
No.
Oh, okay, I was saying, yeah, because I don't view it that way, although some people argue it is. But yeah, so you just make a list of those that we know are not, um, and so you have a list of additives that are not psychoactive as examples, and then a list of things that are, like no cannabis oil, no alcohol, stuff like that. I was gonna ask too, I'm trying to remember on the, why are we setting no water? I mean, sorry, no, only water for extractions, no methanol or ethanol extractions? It seems like those are pretty common in the industry now, in the decrim market.
Yeah, when we were first developing this rule, it was the idea that there wasn't research that suggested that those were safe methods of extraction, but I'm not opposed to putting those in if people think that they're safe. It's more about, so that part was about safety. Philip, you've had your hand up for a while. What did you want to add?
Yeah, I just was going to second what Sue was saying there, because residual solvent testing is required as part of, I believe, some of the regulatory panels. So if people wanted to use methanol and purge it all out, why not be allowed to use it, I guess?
The solvent testing is a random testing once per year, though. It's not for every batch that you're producing. Does that change things for you when you think about it that way, Keela?
It does. My opinion would be that for every batch there should be testing, but that is my opinion coming from the industry of cannabis.
Yeah, so you would recommend then testing for solvents every time you test for potency?
That's correct.
Okay. Sue, is your hand? Do you want to add more, Sue?
Oh, no, sorry, taking it down.
Sorry, 80.
Yeah, so under number 3, if the products that are available are just fruiting bodies and powdered fruiting bodies, and methanol and ethanol kind of go out the window because those are usually used for manufactured goods or things like chocolates, gummies, etc. That's my understanding. So I think that if that is the decision, that it's only fruit and powdered fruit, then this all looks fine to me.
Yeah, that was the decision we made for this first round of recommendations. It's not to say that in later rulemaking things could change to allow for those types of products, but as the regulated market was coming online, we thought for this first year that we should be restricted to fruiting bodies and powdered.
Okay. Then I just had one other, and this is kind of getting into the nerdy weeds, but if we're talking about additives and adulterants, there are impairing additives and adulterants, such as alcohol and cannabis. And then there are non-impairing additives, such as lion's mane or cannabidiol, CBD, whatever. So that might be one other thing to consider, that we're not allowing for impairing adulterants like alcohol or cannabis. But yeah, this is a tricky one, because if we're talking about combining psilocybin with other psychedelic substances, you might have to think carefully about the word that you use, or maybe I'm just overcomplicating it and we just don't need to mention the word impairing or non-impairing.
I think that the impairing, non-impairing language helps, and/or the idea of that preparation does not allow for the combination of natural medicine with any other impairing substances might capture it, right? Like, so that's, as you were speaking, that's what's coming to mind, and I was trying to find that thread. So let me see. So
the problem with the word impairing is that some people might take exception and claim that, for instance, THC does not impair, but enhances, say, cognition. So the word psychoactive might be better.
Yeah, apologies for not raising my hand. I'm switched to my phone. I'm not trying to do it on my phone. But 80 had said something earlier that I thought was good, because this whole thing about impairing or psychoactive when talking about adulterants or other substances, it leaves a lot to interpretation, as was just mentioned. But 80 had used this phraseology a few minutes ago about something about like other than the altering the effect of the intended effect of the natural medicine, or the known effect of the natural medicine, or something like that. I think there's something to that, like using the known intended effect as a baseline and then skewing that is what's not allowed, versus trying to define psychoactivity or define impairment opens up like these other rabbit holes that I don't think we want to argue here.
Sorry, I was thinking I forgot that I'm supposed to be leading the meeting. Yeah, I'm trying to see if we can find a way to capture this one bit, which is to say, I mean, so like we're fine with water, we're fine with fruit juice. We might be fine with combining it with hot chocolate, whatever else, right? But this idea is that we don't want to combine it with cannabis, right? We don't want to combine it with alcohol. We don't want to allow people to combine it with fentanyl. I'm going to keep saying fentanyl because I've been writing a research paper on fentanyl. But anyway, this idea is to say, how do we limit preparation to, without getting overly restricted, how do we limit the preparation to making ingestible products that do not include any other psychoactive compound? Does that get them? I want to use the word over any other, so that we're excluding psilocybin as the natural compound. Allison?
Just offering for your consideration that maybe it's about they're not allowed to combine it with anything else, that they'd be required to have a license in order to manufacture, which would be covering alcohol as well as cannabis in the state of Colorado. That would not necessarily include things, as far as I know, like tobacco or nicotine products, which I think you would also want to try to prohibit. That might be one pathway to consider.
It's interesting. Thanks. I'll consider that. Edie, your hand is up as well.
Yeah, we might consider the term mind altering. CBD is psychoactive in the sense that it prevents seizures. That by definition is psychoactivity. It's not impairing, but it is changing brain activity. So we might consider something like mind altering substances. It cannot be combined with other mind altering substances.
What about if we said something like any other scheduled substances, or I don't know if I bring in federal law, but does that clarify things if we talked about substances that are scheduled?
Alcohol.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly, alcohol.
What if you say too, with 80s comment, if you say inherently mind altering, so that way lemon juice is not it does enhance the intoxicating effects, but it's not inherently mind altering on its own. So any substances that don't meet that threshold, then
again, trying to think and talk at the same time. Let me think. Sorry, I looked away from our screen. Edie, your hand is still up. Do you have more comment?
Yeah, and this is not a good example, but I can read you the way that Oregon has defined an adulterant. I don't necessarily agree with this, but they define it as chemicals, drugs, plants, or substances that alter the intoxicating effect. They also mention duration toxicity of psilocybin products, or any additive, or any, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying, I believe I got the language of intoxicating effects from reviewing the Oregon rules. That's where I think it originated from. It's a phrase I've commonly used.
Yeah, it's
Heather?
problematic.
Yeah, I was just going to say, should the board consider maybe a different approach? Because again, these words, psychoactive, impairing, intoxicating, are all very difficult to actually define and to understand what they mean and how to apply them. Would it be better to consider something like saying the only things that may be added to these products must be, defined as foods or substances listed for the intended use of oral consumption in the FDA inactive ingredient database, like be more restrictive in that way versus, again, using these terms that are very hard to actually define.
Would you consider the fruit juices inactive ingredients?
I wouldn't, but I would consider it a food. So that's why I would say, like, you can add things that we consider food. And if you want to make it broader.
But could someone make the argument that alcohol is food? Like, say, if it came in the form of a rum cake or something like a rum-filled candy? I don't know why it's rum, but that's what came in my mind.
I would have to ask, and maybe Allison knows since she works for DOR, is alcohol. I don't think alcohol is defined as a food, but I would need to confirm that.
But are alcohol containing foods still defined as food? Allison, put you on the spot.
I don't know the answer to that question, but I did want to jump in because I like Heather's suggestion, in part because by implementing this through rules, we're going to need to be able to point to something so that our licensees know what exactly is permitted. So by having, say, a reference to the inactive ingredient list that the FDA produces or food, what's defined as food, it narrows down all of the different things that licensees might be needing to look at and try to understand, in addition to the regulations that we'll be promulgating. So it'll make it easier from my perspective for both us and licensees.
All right, let me see if I can take a stab at it. Sam, let me know when you're ready to type.
Yeah.
Type it down below. I wouldn't try to change things just yet, but just type it down below for now.
That's what I wanted to know.
Yeah. So I would say preparation is defined as using fruiting bodies. You can copy and paste if you want, but yeah. Preparation is defined as using fruiting bodies or powdered fruiting bodies to make ingestible products that contain only foods or inactive ingredients as defined by the FDA. We can find that language I have above about inactive ingredients.
One second. It's in the MGAP section, right?
Yeah. Sam's looking at that language. Heather, your hand is still up. Did you want to add? Anyone want to add to this language? I'm going to have to wrap this up by 4 o'clock, so I just want to give everyone a heads up that we got 20 minutes left one way or another. Yes, so city use as defined by the FDA's inactive ingredient database. Yeah, delete. Yeah, delete. And I just take out the take it. So preparation is defined as fruiting bodies or powdered fruiting bodies to make ingestible products that contain foods or only contain foods or inactive ingredients as defined by the FDA's inactive ingredient database. Does that work for people? Right.
Just gonna throw a wrench in it without much of a solution, but just got to be careful that you're not trying to make a recommendation that swallows the product manufacturer license whole, because that is a separate activity that will be licensed by DOR, right? So like, you can't just, if DOR wants to regulate chocolate bars, you can't just recommend that facilitators can make chocolate bars, for example. And so I don't know if this is specific enough to avoid that.
So this is, again, I'm trying to differentiate production from preparation, right? So this is the idea that I'm the facilitator, I'm getting ready to administer the medicine, and the individual says to me, I'd like to drink it as a tea. And I say, okay, I'm going to brew the tea for you, right? But not where someone says I want to eat it as a chocolate, then they should know that right now we're not allowing for that type of product. That making a chocolate would be production to me, not preparation. But I don't know if that's defined clearly enough here. Go ahead, Amy.
Well, what I was going to say then is we also need a definition of production, right? That, essentially preparation is everything that happens after the compliance sticker goes on a final product. Production is everything that happens prior to the compliance sticker going on a finished good.
So could we say preparation is defined as using a produced or a product that consists only of a natural medicine product. So preparation is defined as using a natural medicine product.
I would say finished and labeled natural medicine product.
Fish, a natural medicine product that consists only of fruiting bodies or powdered fruiting bodies to make ingestible products that only contain foods or inactive ingredients by the FDA's inactive ingredient database. How do we feel about that?
Good.
And I would actually suggest that if we like this definition of preparation, that instead of having it in these bullet points, we actually put it in the glossary that we've been developing. But for now, we can leave it as part of the recommendations. But does that make sense to everybody? All right, so Sam, this would replace that second sentence in bullets 5 and 6.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Take your time with that. So while Sam's doing that stuff, I want to pay attention to time and note that I have to go to a different training that runs from 5.
You're muted.
As soon as I switch screens, the muting thing stops working. And so I said a bunch of funny stuff, just laugh and pretend like you heard it all. But I have to get to Longmont by 5 o'clock for an additional training that runs from 5 to 8. And so I need to make sure I have enough time to do that. But I do want to see if we can move through a couple of the other agenda items. I actually think we've done agenda item 1, agenda item 2. So that brings us to the last agenda item, which is to say, after reviewing and making the edits we've just made, I would seek a motion from a board member to approve the list of recommendations from this subcommittee and move them to the full board for their approval. Is there such a motion out there for me? That would need to come from either Skippy or Soup.
Oh, sorry, so moved.
All right, and then I would need the second. Thank you. So basically, this would allow for these recommendations to be moved to the full board meeting that happens on Friday. And so any discussion of that motion amongst the three, I mean, anyone could discuss it, but before we go to a vote, any discussion? Hearing none, then I call for a vote on the motion to move to approve the list of recommendations from the subcommittee and move them to the full board. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstain? The motion passes. Brian, do we need to go to executive for any reason, knowing that I'll have 5 minutes to do that?
No.
Okay. Again, I'd like to point out that I won't be at the full board meeting, so I'm hopeful that Skippy or Sue, if you are there, you can represent the subcommittee and the recommendations that we're moving forward. As like I said, as far as I know, we've addressed the majority, if not all, of the questions that were posed to this subcommittee at its inception. And so I just want to, again, thank everybody for the hard work that you've done on this subcommittee. And I want to thank everyone for your attendance to the meeting today. And then I just want to check in with staff. Do we need to do anything else before I move to attestation and a motion for adjournment? All right, so I'm going to move to attestation then. Do you attest and affirm that all conflicts of interest have been disclosed and the confidentiality of all board member matters has been maintained since the previous board meeting? The chair, myself, I do attest. Skippy?
I do attest.
And Sue?
I attest.
Right now, the only meeting that's listed in my agenda is the full board meeting, which is Friday. I think because of the changes they're going to have with subcommittee meetings, there's not currently, and right now, there's not another subcommittee meeting scheduled for this subcommittee. Is that accurate?
That is correct. We'll have more information for everyone after the full board meeting and meetings for the non-voting participants to attend.
So just watch your emails for the scheduling of future meetings. And with that, I call for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second, and any discussion? No, it's a go to a vote. A vote. All those in favor of adjourning the meeting? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstains? Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate all the hard work today. I'll see you all next time.
Ciao for now. Good work, guys.